If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 16, Childhood, 15. You know. I'm kind of regretting leaving without Shun-kun. That thought lingered in Ishan's parents' minds as they searched the mountain for the missing neighbor. With both of their quirks being well suited for search and rescue situations, Genzae and Keiko had quickly volunteered when the Hado family organized a search party. However, not long after they began, Genzae detected unusual movement in the distance movement that didn't match any normal human pattern. He immediately voiced his concern to the rest of the group. The rest of the search party, consisting of Nejire's parents and grandparents, brushed it off, assuming it was just a wild animal. Bears and boars weren't uncommon in these mountains, after all. This was a community used to living alongside dangerous wildlife. Everyone carried bear spray, and two had brought a shovel for protection. While these so-called protective measures did little to reassure the shrunken couple, there wasn't much else they could reasonably demand. It wasn't like everyone held hunting-grade weapons. The only hunter in the village with a licensed rifle lived on the opposite side of town, and there simply wasn't time to call him in before searching further. So Genzae, uneasy about the presence of a quadrupedal animal somewhere nearby, could only swallow his nerves and silently hope it wouldn't head in their direction. The missing neighbor had a mutant-type quirk that gave him deer antlers and hooves, which were features that only increased the danger if he wandered deep into the forest. Thankfully, due to repeated incidents in the past, the village, along with the neighbor's son who was frequently out due to having work in the nearby town, had agreed to attach a tracker to the man's antlers. Since the antlers had no nerves or blood vessels, it was harmless, even if a bit unconventional. It was essentially just a piercing. With the tracker active, the real challenge was reaching him. His deer hooves made traversing steep, uneven terrain far easier for him than for any normal human. This was the main reason that Genzae and Keiko volunteered. So, with Genzae being the radar for possible wild animals and Keiko for knowing which tracks were safer, it greatly assisted the Hado family. Still, the distance was far greater than anyone had anticipated, turning the search into an impromptu hiking expedition. Keiko exercised regularly for her health and managed fine, but Genzae lagged behind, already visibly winded. With Ishan's senses that far surpassed Genzae and Keiko's along with his teleportation, this sudden hiking trip could have been nipped from the root. However, they had promised to keep his teleportation a secret. Convenience wasn't a good enough reason to break that trust. And more importantly, they were still parents. Asking a child, especially one not even of age, to shoulder the responsibility of saving a life was an unreasonable burden. That conviction, however, began to waver as time dragged on. This is weird. Hado Genji, Nejire's grandfather, stared down at the tracker on his phone, his brow furrowing. What is it? Nejire's grandmother, Hado Tomo responded, already exasperated with how long this abrupt hiking session had gone for. Keiko had reassured everyone that they'd left a note before heading out, but Nejire was bound to worry if she came home to an empty house. Without waiting for Genji's answer, Tomo snatched the phone from his hands and frowned. How is he moving so fast? That single sentence sent a chill through all 6 members of the search party. Are you sure you're reading that right? Hado Mitsuru, Nejire's father, jogged up to her, peering at the screen. Mitsuru stared at the screen for a long second, longer than necessary. That's not human, he said quietly. His expression slowly hardened as he looked from the phone to his wife, then to Ishan's parents. We're heading back, he said with finality. We're getting old man Saburo. His voice left no room for argument as he picked up the pace as he turned around. Why? Genzae started, only to be cut off when Keiko slapped his shoulder. Think for a second, she snapped, frowning. How can an elderly man with memory loss move that fast? His quirk isn't even remotely related to speed. She grabbed Genzae's hand, fully aware of her husband's limited stamina. Without support, he'd be exhausted in minutes. While Genzae noticed her hand subconsciously shaking, he couldn't say much, as his was the same. Mitsuru's next statement only made the nervousness worse. 60 km per hour, to be exact, Mitsuru added grimly. 60. Shiori exclaimed. Isn't the average for bears 40? 40 to 48, Mitsuru finished. And that speed is assuming old man Moriyama is already in its mouth. The maximum speed is likely much higher. With no one in the group possessing anything near a combat-oriented quirk, the best bet was to get assistance. Realistically, Moriyama was probably already dead by the time the tracker registered movement that fast. With speeds of 60 kilometers an hour in the mountains no less, no one present wanted to face such a creature. They turned back, increasing their pace, but they were still several hundred meters from the village, never mind the distance to Old Man Saburo's house. Still, there was one small silver lining. With lives at stake, Genzei decided calling for assistance, his overpowered son, was probably justified. He looked at the phone that said no signal, hoping that eventually, they would get close enough to get a signal, in which they could call in Ishan for assistance or at least faster evacuation. Keiko noticed his anxious expression immediately, glancing down at his tightened hand on his phone. Reaching for her own phone, she was about to try calling Ishan when Mitsuru suddenly froze. His face drained of color. It's coming toward us. At that exact moment, Keiko's phone flickered. 1 bar of signal. Damn, they went further than I thought. Ishan was, admittedly, cheating by teleporting whenever Nejire wasn't looking his way. That said, it wasn't like Nejire wasn't doing the same. She used her quirk to hover over especially rocky or uneven terrain, occasionally glancing back to make sure Ishan was still behind her. Every time she did, she found him keeping up without as much effort as she thought it would. So precognition can do that too. She called out cheerfully. Ishan just nodded in response, all the while keeping his omniscient domain active. At its current stage, the teleportation domain had a maximum effective radius of roughly 150 meters. Within that range, the information he received was nearly flawless. The omniscient domain extended a little farther, reaching around 160 meters with acceptable accuracy, though the data began to degrade noticeably beyond that point. Past 250 meters, the amount of information was practically non-existent. Ishan didn't bother factoring data beyond the 150-meter mark into his teleportation calculations. The margin of error simply wasn't worth it. For searching, however, the wider range was more than sufficient. By following the search party's trail, as long as they hadn't gone too far ahead, Ishan could reach them within minutes. Any remotely threatening wildlife that wandered into his teleportation domain was immediately relocated 6 feet under. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say, Ishan mused, keeping pace behind Nejire. On top of that, whenever his precognition flagged a branch, loose rock, or uneven step that might trip her up, he quietly teleported away before she could reach it. As they continued their rescue mission that started off a bad feeling, Ishan momentarily faltered, and could only watch until Nejire opened her mouth to speak. A moment later, Nejire spoke. Shun-chan. Yet. You know that rainbow world I always see, but you don't. Yet. Well, she said thoughtfully, I was just thinking. I feel like I only see it when I'm around you. Is that so? Yet. At first I thought it was the house, but then I saw it at the dojo, and even at school, so I figured it was the neighborhood. Nejire continued, voice bouncing with excitement. And? Ishan prompted carefully. Well, since I'm still seeing it now and we're definitely not in that neighborhood, it has to be you. I'm kind of amazed you blamed the neighborhood before me. Ishan inwardly complained. So, Nejire went on, how do you do it? While she didn't turn around, probably to make sure she didn't run into a tree, she also didn't like silence in general. Which was why she made the occasional comment about Ishan keeping up with her pace. But with a question that festered since she first saw that rainbow world, Nejire assumed that it was a good time to ask, and it also filled up the silence. A win-win. Ring. Ring. Perfect timing. While Ishan could see into the future within his omniscient domain, outside factors such as a phone call originating beyond its range, were harder to predict unless he sacrificed range for precision. And since he was prioritizing range for the search, his precognition only extended about a second ahead. Ishan slowed to a stop and quickly answered the call from Keiko. Help BZZT. Shunkun BZZT. The line cut out. Ishan stared at the phone. The call had dropped. Chapter 17, Childhood, 16. Ishan didn't waste a second. He reached out his hand into open air, and the next moment Nejire was in front of him. While Ishan could teleport without using himself as the reference point, it was much more efficient to use himself as a reference point because it meant he could teleport further. Whoa! Nejire yelped as the world lurched. Colors smeared for half a heartbeat before snapping back into focus. She blinked, disoriented, then looked down to see Ishan's fingers locked tightly around her own. They held hands often, usually because Nejire insisted, and sometimes just because it felt natural, but Ishan almost never initiated it. So when Nejire felt the familiar palm of her best friend, instead of panicking at the sudden displacement, Nejire found herself oddly comforted. However, Ishan didn't bother explaining, closing his eyes. In terms of mutant changes from their own quirks, Ishan was basically a pro-max version of Gensei. Ishan's quirk didn't rely on conventional sight the way most people understood it. His quirk in extreme evolution of Gensei's hypercognition meant that vision was only one of many inputs feeding into his omniscient domain, or his senses. He didn't need to see in order to see. Sight was just another variable, completely redundant. So he shut it off. He inhaled once then held it, cutting out scent and dulling taste, stripping away every variable that wasn't strictly necessary for his omniscient domain. Now having removed 2.5 redundant variables for his omniscient domain to register, his available range was effectively doubled. He hadn't done it before because there he didn't feel much of a need to rush. But his mom's emergency call changed that. I have to get to them, now. He teleported. No one. Ishan clenched his jaw in tension and teleported again. And again. And again. The moment new information registered, he jumped, never giving his mind time to settle. Data slammed into him faster than his brain was used to processing, even with his high computation speed. Ishan ignored everything that wasn't important. Teleport scan teleport. Teleport scan teleport. Each jump crammed new data into his skull before the last batch had finished registering. His temples throbbed. White static could be felt at the edges of his thoughts. This is giving me a headache. Where? He repeated like a mantra. He teleported. Again and again. 5 seconds. 5 seconds of teleporting and scanning 5 times a second. 50 scans. 50 teleports. Then. Human movement. Ishan froze mid-thought, narrowing his focus on the silhouettes forming in his domain. 6 people. His family. Nejire's family. They were running from something outside of his range, but they were unharmed. The relief hit him so hard it almost knocked the breath from his lungs. He teleported once more, pulling them fully into the range of his teleportation domain, then stopped. GH. A hiss slipped out as he finally released his breath. His knees nearly buckled. He brought his free hand up to his head, fingers digging into his vanilla-colored hair as he pressed against his temple. Phew-ugh. The thought came unfiltered. But now that they were in his domain, Ishan could say with 99.9% confidence that they were perfectly safe. The headache was literal shit, sure, but his teleportation was still usable. That meant he could protect them, with near-perfect certainty. Whew, light work, no reaction. Nejire, on the other hand, was not having a good time. Even with a stomach that could handle barrel rolls, sudden dives, and the occasional loop-de-loop using her quirk, the rapid-fire environment shifts made everything churn unpleasantly. Her ears, her eyes, her sense of balance, none of it could keep up. Ishan was teleporting once every 0.2 seconds, and unlike him or Gensei, Nejire didn't have hypercognition or something similar to reduce that sensory lag. Motion sickness hit hard. The only thing saving her was the forest itself. Tree after tree blurred together, similar enough that her brain and eyes didn't have to completely reprocess every jump. Still, it sucked. Nejire rubbed her stomach with her free hand. Ugh. Her face went a little green. She genuinely felt like she might throw up. And yet, her grip on Ishan's hand tightened. Partly because it was rare for him to hold on like this. Mostly because she wanted something solid to brace against just in case he decided to do that thing again. He looked like he'd swallowed several lemons, his face scrunched in pain, hair a mess from his frantic attempt at massaging his own head. Seeing someone who looked worse off than she felt, Nejire's motion sickness slipped to the back of her mind. Shun-chan. Without letting go of their intertwined hands, Nejire used her free hand to steady him. Are you okay? Do you need help? She pushed down the urge to shake him as the questions tumbled out. Should I call Mom? First, your mom is the one who needs rescuing, so I don't know how you're planning to call her, Ishan muttered. Second, please lower your voice. It's making it worse. His expression softened slightly as he looked at Nejire, who was now right up in his face, copying his temple massage. Except she wasn't really massaging it, just rubbing it and messing up his hair even more. He didn't bother stopping her. If she thought it was helping, who was he to argue? His eyebrows stayed furrowed, though, as the lingering throb refused to go away. Never doing that shit again. After a few seconds, his face settled back into its usual neutral expression. Since the search party was now fully inside his domain, the rescue itself was basically complete. I'm fine. Nejire studied him for a moment. When he looked normal again, she figured it was safe to ask what just happened, but Ishan cut her off before she could speak. I'll explain when we get back. She hesitated, full of curiosity, but nodded. They were still technically on a rescue mission. Ishan teleported them ahead, placing them directly along the path the search group was taking. Now all they had to do was wait for them to arrive. That was when Ishan noticed what they were running from. Information poured into his mind, and he blinked, eyebrows lifting in genuine confusion as a curse slipped out before he could stop it. What the actual fuck is that? Chapter 18, Childhood, 17. What the actual fuck is that? Now fully within his range, Ishan's first instinct was to put it 6 feet under. But the moment he properly saw the outline of the thing's body, he froze. Is that a goddamn skinwalker? Its hind legs were far longer than its front ones, the proportions warped and wrong, and its face was vaguely human, just enough to be unsettling. Its stomach was grotesquely deformed, antlers jutting straight through its torso as black blood oozed from the wounds. And yet, the thing didn't even seem to register the pain. Its face was locked into a permanent expression of agony, like someone was slowly tearing its soul out. Its arms looked like what bat limbs might be without wings, ending in claws reminiscent of oversized ant pincers. As it ran, a human face began to form in its stomach, frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Its jaw hung open, revealing a circular ring of teeth like a leech's interspersed with jagged, insect-like fangs that clearly didn't belong or fit, seeing as blood was oozing out them as well. It let out a constant, low groan that sounded eerily like, "Help, help," its glassy eyes and oversized ears twitching every so often. What happened to MHA? Ishan thought grimly. Did I somehow get transmigrated into the SCP world while I wasn't looking? He frowned, staring at what looked like a textbook example of something you'd put in a horror movie. What's what? Nejire asked, noticing Ishan's expression shift from confusion to outright disgust. She followed his line of sight, which showed nothing. And hey! No cursing! She added a beat later. Ishan ignored her. No way in hell I'm letting a kid see that. Not even considering himself when he made that decision, Ishan immediately changed his plan from waiting for the search party to come back to give him time to ignore the headache. With a thought, the Hato family and his own were teleported directly in front of them. Go faster, Shun-kun! Keiko started, only to stop short when the scenery abruptly changed. The moment hypercognition registered Ishan standing in front of him, Genzae promptly dropped to the ground, exhausted. Some may think that it's not very parent-like of him to immediately rely on a child in a life-threatening situation, but Ishan was an outlier. Genzae, what are you doing, Nejire? Mitsuru blurted out, confusion replacing his concern as he spotted his daughter. Hi, Dad. Nejire waved cheerfully. Mitsuru waved back without thinking, still holding onto his mother, Tomo, with his other hand. Hi. He said, then froze. Wait, what about the thing that was chasing us? Father. I'm right here, Genji said calmly. Though disoriented, he glanced down at the tracker in his hand while his daughter-in-law, far more physically capable than him, kept a steady grip on his other arm. Deciding to ask the questions later, the current issue was with that monster chasing them through the forest. Did it stop chasing us? Genji asked. He frowned at the tracker. The red dot representing the creature jittered unnaturally, lurching forward, then snapping back. Showing that dot to the rest of the adults, some of the more quick-witted ones, Shiori and Mitsuru and Ishan's parents, looked at Ishan. For Genzae and Keiko, it was rather obvious who was the culprit behind that glitching, while for Shiori and Mitsuru, it obviously wasn't Nejire, and if the others could, they would have done that already. Ishan met their gazes and gave a small nod. Yet. Me, he gestured with his eyebrow. Why aren't you, you know? Keiko asked hesitantly, subtly pointing downward. She didn't know about Ishan's dismantling aspect, so her only idea of dealing with such creatures was his original method, putting them 6 feet under. Well. Ishan tried and failed to mime this looks like an experiment with vague gestures. He gave up. Instead, he glanced at Mitsuru, then at Nejire. Nejire still hadn't let go of Ishan's hand, nor did it even look like it was about to happen anytime soon. Mitsuru immediately looked at Nejire in confusion, then looked at the two hands that were intertwined, forced down a fond smile, and put on an angry expression. Heido Nejire. The sudden shift in tone sent a chill straight down Nejire's spine. Yes. What exactly are you doing out here? Keiko added, catching on immediately. In the woods. Without adult supervision. Didn't you say Shunchan counted as supervision? Nejire tried weakly. With that being the only counter-argument she had, she subtly looked away from her parents, looking towards Ishan for assistance. Ishan was already looking the other way. Traitor. Nejire puffed out her cheeks. Heido Nejire, her mother called, thoroughly amused. Come over here. You're getting a talking to. This wasn't the time or place for punishment, and Ishan clearly wanted Nejire out of the discussion anyway. Shiori gently grabbed a defeated Nejire and guided her a short distance away. Nejire attempted to appeal to Ishan's emotional side with puppy eyes on the way, but her head was turned back by Shiori before Ishan could even turn around. Darn it! I'm totally dragging Shunchan everywhere when we get home, so he's always exhausted. Nejire sulked internally. Now that Nejire was out of the picture, Ishan thought it was appropriate to give a 3-line summary. I can teleport. To explain to the Heido family. The thing chasing you isn't human, but there's still a person inside it. Why he didn't immediately put it 6 feet under. And it looks like some kind of experiment that escaped. Why Nejire wasn't included? Perfect. How bad can it be? Genji asked. Tomo nodded uncertainly. Pretty bad. Ishan tried to explain what it looked like, but gave up after a few seconds. He looked towards Keiko and Genzei, who each gave a nod. He teleported the creature into the air, then teleported it back into the air just before gravity could take effect. All 5 adults stared at the hovering abomination. Disgust. Fear. Horror. Like father, like son, Genzei's reaction was immediate and heartfelt. What the fuck is that? Chapter 19, Childhood, 18. At the sight of the monstrosity, all of the adults instinctively backed away a few steps. What the fuck is that? Genzei muttered, before Keiko smacked him across the back. No cursing. Hey! There's no way that isn't your first reaction. Genzei shot back, gesturing wildly at the thing hovering before them. The creature hung awkwardly in the air, staring at them with a greedy, unfocused gaze. Its mouth opened and closed as thick, blood-stained drool dripped from leech-like teeth. Well. Even Keiko couldn't argue with that, and she clicked her tongue, backing off. Genji cautiously stepped closer, circling toward the creature's swollen midsection. His eyes narrowed as he noticed something protruding through the flesh deer antlers, unmistakably so. He glanced back at Ishan. It's safe to approach, if you want. As Genji moved in, Genzei leaned toward Ishan and whispered urgently, are you sure it's safe? Why would I lie? Ishan snapped back quietly, eyebrows raised in disbelief. So I can watch Nejire's grandpa die. Maybe it was the creature's sheer presence, or maybe the information influx from hypercognition giving Genzei a headache, but Genzei's common sense seemed to have short-circuited. Flushing, he nodded quickly and retreated to Keiko's side instead of digging himself deeper. Genji examined the stomach more closely, then looked back at Ishan. Can you take out Moriyama? Yet. Ishan replied, hesitant but certain. With omniscient domain in its natural state, Ishan constantly received topographical data, normally supplemented by his other senses to create a coherent picture. That was why, when precognition activated, it didn't just return vague outlines like radar, giving the future projections color. However, if Ishan deliberately shrunk the range of the omniscient domain, the accuracy increased qualitatively. This meant that Ishan could basically see inside the monster and analyze everything perfectly like it was X-ray vision if the domain was small enough. Shrinking and increasing the domain in exchange for increased or decreased information did require some focus. Genji glanced between Ishan and the stomach. Is he alive? Yes. Somehow, there were 2 heartbeats inside the creature. One came from its chest where a human heart should be. The other pulsed weakly from within its stomach. When Ishan focused there, the image made his stomach twist violently. Moriyama was barely recognizable, reduced to a mangled mass of flesh. Bones were bent at impossible angles, blood pooling freely inside the creature's stomach. Worse, his flesh was fusing with the monster's inner lining. Ishan barely had time to turn away before vomiting what little he'd eaten that morning. His enhanced senses betrayed him completely. He could smell the rotting and fusing flesh, see the flowing blood, hear the further cracking of already broken bones. His legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees, heaving. Shun-kun! Keiko rushed to his side immediately, rubbing his back. Tomo followed close behind. Even knowing Ishan for less than a day, watching a child in pain was unbearable for any mother. Ishan had always thought of himself as somewhat desensitized to gore. Not because he was edgy or cared about blood or anything, but having a childhood with unrestricted internet access meant that he inevitably saw some fucked up things. He could watch movies that people considered cursed, and look at images of gore with only a wince and a weird feeling throughout his body. This was different. This was a four-dimensional version. Smell, sound, depth, no screen between him and reality. Damn it, this is killing me, he thought hazily as tears streamed from his eyes and his throat burned. However, desensitization was the best method with his mind, as Ishan, instead of automatically dismissing his hyperanalysis, merely kept paying attention to it, but trying to also distance himself from it mentally. Kind of like how an experienced doctor could look at a patient from a detached point of view. After throwing up the rest of his meal, Ishan started dry heaving, a natural physical reaction. However, his mind was already ignoring the pain and focusing solely on the monster. Tomo pressed a water bottle into his hands. Ishan drank automatically, barely registering it. If Ishan didn't do anything about Moriyama, then his death was only inevitable. His heart may still be beating, but he also had to stop the fusing inside the monster's stomach. However, this fusing also told Ishan something. This monster wasn't just a monster. It was something with a quirk. Hyperanalysis confirmed it, a human brain, a human heart. This thing had been a person. And inside its flesh, there was something like a tracker. After confirming that, Ishan immediately dismantled the device. He didn't know its purpose, but leaving it intact wasn't worth the risk. Finishing the bottle, Ishan took a few deep breaths. Only then did he finally register the worried faces around him. I'm fine now, he said quietly. Yet even with that reassurance, Keiko still hovered close to Ishan, worried that something might happen again. Ishan turned to Genji. The person inside is still alive. Is that so? Genji exclaimed. Before he could say more, Tomo yanked his ear hard. Is that what you're focused on right now? Didn't you see the kid nearly collapse? Genji winced, chastened. I'm really fine, Ishan insisted, cutting in. Tomo shot Genji a glare before exhaling and letting go. I can get him out, Ishan continued, voice steady but strained. But he didn't need to finish. Every adult present understood, their expressions darkening. What do we do, then? Mitsuru asked tightly. The nearest hospital is an hour away and it's just a clinic. Even with an ambulance it's impossible, Genji added. Silence fell. One by one, their eyes drifted toward the same person. Ishan. With what he'd already shown, getting Moriyama to a proper hospital would be easy for him. But after watching him break down, after seeing how hard he was forcing himself to stand, no one could bring themselves to ask. This was supposed to be the adult's responsibility. Leaving it to an elementary schooler wasn't right. No matter how capable he seemed, Ishan was still just a child. So, what were they supposed to do? Chapter 20, Childhood, 19. A few seconds passed with no one coming up with a good idea, while Ishan pushed his focus deeper into the monster's insides. Couldn't I teleport this guy's body back together? It was a stray thought that Ishan had, and it was undeniably possible. While Ishan couldn't see individual cells, he could distinguish organs and structures. With how splicing worked, and with the formula he'd modified a while back to allow for perfect welding, it could be done. But even with that capability, Ishan had never bothered learning anatomy in full. After all, life or death situations didn't happen every day. Yet now, staring into the creature, the only reason Moriyama was still alive was because being fused with the monster was forcibly supplying his heart with blood and oxygen. Damn it! Ishan clenched his hand in frustration. Death was something Ishan was painfully familiar with. In the middle of college classes and a part-time job, a call that should have been ordinary had announced the deaths of both his parents. The people who raised him. The people who loved him. He had spoken to his mother about what to eat for dinner that night. He had talked with his father about getting a driver's license. No goodbyes. No last meeting. They were gone. And they weren't coming back. Ishan knew what it felt like to come home expecting warmth only to be met with silence. An empty house far too large for one person. Days spent without speaking a word. It hurt. Nejire had told him about Moriyama on the way here. About his son. About how he still played with her, even with dementia. About how kind he was. The odds of Moriyama surviving were almost non-existent. But did that mean he had to die? Did Nejire need to experience death so young? The kind of parting that comes far too early. The kind where you go to someone's house to play only for them to never be there again. Ishan was just about to make up his mind, even if it meant pushing his quirk until his head went blank, when Genji spoke. Let's give him a peaceful ending. Tomo and Mitsuru turned to Genji in shock. Before and even after Moriyama's dementia, Genji and Moriyama had been inseparable. Best friends in every sense of the word. If anyone wasn't expected to say it, it was Genji. And yet, Tomo understood. Even before Moriyama's condition worsened, every conversation had been painful. Every time Genji went up the mountain to retrieve him, it tore something open. After all, that mountain was where they had played as children. Almost every adult in the village had memories there. Maybe, before Moriyama forgot everything, it was better for him to die like this. Genji grimaced. Old age brought experience with goodbyes, but being forced to choose between your best friend dying in peace, or living in constant suffering. There had only ever been one answer. Ishan looked at Genji, uncertainty tightening his chest. Even if he could be the executioner, it didn't mean he wanted to be. Death was a farewell. Before he could finish the thought, Tomo stepped forward, glaring at Genji. Genji, she said sharply. Are you really prepared to put blood on a child's hands? That was enough to make Keiko speak up. She didn't think she had the right to interfere in something as personal as a neighbor's death, but she couldn't allow that. Ishan will not be the one to kill him. She wrapped her arms around Ishan protectively, while Genzei stepped behind him, steadying his shoulders. Genji stared, confused, then realization hit him. Oh no, he said quickly. I'd never ask the kid to do that. Who do you think I am? He exhaled, then continued, voice firm. What I need to know is, can you keep him still without whatever you're doing now? As long as Ishan maintained the teleportation, it meant he could still see it. That was how quirks like his usually worked, even if he didn't know the specifics. And Genji didn't want Ishan to witness a farewell. Ishan gave a hesitant nod. He could embed it halfway into stone, sink it into the ground, or form a cage. Embedding it felt wrong. So instead, he teleported massive tree trunks into place, locking around the monster's limbs. It immobilized the creature while leaving its stomach visible. Genji studied the makeshift cage and nodded, then turned to Mitsuru. Get Saburo. Mitsuru started to move, but Ishan stopped him. He's already here. From the bushes emerged a rugged old man with a thick beard and two long antennae jutting from his head. Genji. Saburo. Saburo's eyes went to the monster, then back to Genji. Is that Moriyama? Yeah, Genji said quietly. He's inside. Only Genji and Saburo had the tracker, too expensive for anyone else, and the three of them had been inseparable for years. If Genji decided to say goodbye, it was only right for Saburo to participate. Saburo walked closer, eyes narrowing as he spotted the deer antlers protruding from the monster's stomach. He stopped. After a few seconds, his permanent scowl deepened. How'd he end up like this? Saburo asked. Genji opened his mouth. The monster. Obviously the monster ate him, you imbecile, Saburo snapped, then sighed. He glanced at Tomo. You're better at this. Tomo followed his gaze to Ishan. Saburo turned, taking in the scene properly now, two adults, tense and guarded, and a kid standing calmly between them. The gun on his back didn't help their nerves. The kid's lack of fear told Saburo everything. This was the one who helped. Saburo approached Ishan, then knelt so they were eye to eye, his expression softening. Thank you. Chapter 21, Childhood, 20. Thank you. Ishan looked at the old man who had spoken. No problem. That was all Ishan could manage. Seeing Ishan's reaction, Saburo nodded and hefted his hunting rifle off his shoulder. He walked over to Genji, the two of them quietly discussing how to send their old friend off. Mitsuru approached Ishan, kneeling beside him and resting a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Ishan, for helping us with this. Genji and Moriyama had grown up in a time where men were expected to bottle up their emotions as the men of the house. Even now, it was rare for either of them to openly show grief. Mitsuru didn't want Ishan to mistake that restraint as being ungrateful. But also, Mitsuru continued, softer now, I'd like you to play with Nejire-chan for a while. Shiori had been keeping Nejire occupied up until now, but she deserved to be present for Moriyama's send-off. Nejire had known Moriyama. She had played with him, and laughed with him. But a child should witness a farewell, not a death. Even if the adults hadn't been especially reliable throughout this entire ordeal, every one of them understood that watching the life leave someone's body wasn't healthy for a child. Okay. Ishan didn't hesitate to agree. He didn't want Nejire to see Moriyama die either. Ishan turned toward his parents. They exchanged uncertain nods, and Ishan nodded back before heading in the direction Nejire had gone. Resetting his omniscient domain, Ishan quickly located her and couldn't help a faint, inward huff of amusement at the contrast. When he arrived, he found Nejire asleep in Shiori's arms. Shiori's lecture hadn't lasted long. She didn't have the heart to scold her daughter for trying to save her because, in her own way, Nejire had. Instead, Shiori had shifted the topic to Ishan's teleportation. That alone had been more than enough to distract Nejire, who immediately began rattling off theories and possibilities about his quirk. But Nejire had spent most of the search flying and exerting her quirk, right up until Ishan had essentially skipped the entire process. The only thing keeping her awake after that had been pure determination to save her parents. Now that her parents were safe and that motivation was gone, the only thing fueling her was Ishan's new quirk. How could he hide something that cool from me this whole time? Shiori, who could read her daughter like clockwork, gently redirected that curiosity toward Ishan while rocking her and patting her head. The combination worked quickly. By the time Ishan arrived, Nejire was already fast asleep. Shiori noticed Ishan approaching and stood up carefully, Nejire still in her arms. Done, Shun-kun. Ishan nodded and held out his arms. Uncle Mitsuru told me to play with Nejire. Shiori understood immediately. She nodded and gently handed Nejire over. While it was a bit comical watching Ishan putting an effort to hold Nejire, seeing as she was taller than him, the sight still brought a fond smile to Shiori's face. Thank you for taking care of Nejire-chan, Shun-kun. This really doesn't have to be that deep. Ishan kept the thought to himself, glancing at Shiori's expression. Can you get Nejire-chan home? Shiori asked. Ishan nodded, giving a bow and a wave, watching as Shiori made her way back to the group. After making sure, Ishan teleported in the direction of the village, but stopped at the range that the teleportation domain ended. It was better to be safe than sorry. What if somehow the monster escaped and everyone died? Ishan had to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Ironically, the distance meant Ishan could still see Moriyama's death like watching it through a screen. It was more like since he wasn't there and looking at his death, it felt like he was watching it from a detached point of view. Not being physically present made it feel unreal. Since Nejire was too heavy for him to carry for long, Ishan teleported leaves and dirt to make a small, makeshift resting spot. He gently set her down and sat nearby. A lot had happened today. First off, maybe it would be good to actively train my computational abilities. Second, learn anatomy. Ishan had once considered whether teleportation could be used to reassemble a body, but until he learned to precisely focus his omniscient domain, it wasn't feasible. And by the time he was able to focus the omniscient domain, it had already been filed to the back of his mind. If teleportation could kill so easily, who was to say it couldn't save just as effectively? While part of his mind wandered through these thoughts, another stayed alert, constantly monitoring the monster and Moriyama. Soon after, a sound could be heard throughout the forest. Bang! The monster's heart was shot. Bang! Moriyama's heart was shot. With Genzei's hypercognition and the antenna-like protrusions on Saburo's head, locating vital points had only been a matter of time. Ishan stared into space as he watched the monster's body finally go slack, its violent movements slowing to nothing. Once he confirmed it was dead, he looked down at Nejire, who stirred at the sound of the gunshots. Is that Grandpa Saburo? She squinted sleepily, then her eyes landed on Ishan. Shun-chan? Shun-chan. For a split second, her first instinct was to punish the traitor who didn't help her earlier, but curiosity immediately overpowered it. Where's Mom? Is everyone safe? She had to take care of something. But she's safe. That's good. Nejire beamed as she pushed herself upright. This is a successful debut of Blueberry Vanilla. Ishan nodded. Now fully awake and reassured, Nejire stepped closer and planted her hands firmly on Ishan's shoulders, putting on the sternest expression she could manage. You have some things to explain, Shun-chan. Yet. The tracker's broken. All for One's distorted voice carried through the monitor, unhurried. Yes, Master. Experiment number FIDM-17. The doctor in the lab coat Dr. Gariki nodded as he adjusted his glasses. The device was destroyed before the specimen's vitals could finish transmitting. All for One's eyes narrowed slightly on the screen. Where was its last recorded location? A mountain in Akita Prefecture. Near a small village. All for One paused. Abandon all experiments and ongoing projects in Akita Prefecture for now. Yes, Master. The doctor agreed without hesitation. Neither of them were foolish. Quirks, by their very nature, were volatile and unpredictable variables. One day, there could exist a quirk that had the force of a nuclear warhead in the hands of a child. Even if the chances were low, they were never zero. From the limited information available specifically, the fact that the vitals and location tracker had been destroyed before the vitals failed, two primary possibilities presented themselves. First, the individual possessed a quirk that ignored distance entirely. Second, they possessed a quirk capable of killing without ever revealing their presence. There were other explanations, of course, but these were the most plausible. Spatial-type quirks were rare, and most were unimpressive. But a spatial ability with sufficient precision and output would be effectively unbeatable in a direct one-on-one confrontation. Neither All for One nor Gariki was arrogant enough to antagonize an unknown, unstable variable without proper data. With the Idio trigger experiments already underway and nearly finished and a final confrontation with All Might looming, it was simply more efficient to cut their losses. Akita Prefecture was, after all, a backwater. A/N, I feel a time skip looming. Also, this is the first extra chap for this weekend. Since we hit the 4000 PS goal last week, which is still crazy to me, there'll be another extra chap TMR for the 4000 PS goal. Originally both were on Saturday, but I had to switch courses cause the formatting was bad. Thanks for reading. Chapter 22, Childhood, Epilogue. Moriyama had a quiet funeral, attended by almost everyone in the village. With the average age of the villagers being in their 50s and above, his passing while mourned felt more like an extension of an inevitability they had all learned to accept. Explaining Moriyama's death to Nejire had been uncomfortable. Trying to phrase it as him having gone to a faraway place he wouldn't be returning from only went so far, but thankfully her parents had already sat her down and talked to her about separation in their own way. While Nejire seemed to understand, or at least looked like she did, being so young, the meaning of an indefinite parting wasn't fully registered in her head. Not long after the funeral, she returned to her usual self. Loss was painful, but time really was the best healer. After all, summer vacation had only just begun. Nejire had followed through with her inner promise, not giving Ishan a single chance to rest. Every morning, before Ishan could even properly register that it was daytime, Nejire, who seemed to have an internal clock far more reliable than any average college student's, would shake him awake with limitless energy. Unfortunately, Ishan could almost never get a good night's sleep. With the unexpected guests staying over at the Hado household, there simply weren't enough rooms. The house only had 3 bedrooms and a single guest room. While the Shunkin family had been perfectly fine with all 3 of them sharing one room, Nejire had firmly and loudly disagreed. In the end, entirely due to Nejire's insistence, she and Ishan ended up sleeping in the same guest room. Which meant Ishan had to endure her rather unfortunate sleeping habits. Waking up in the middle of the night without a single blanket despite them sleeping on completely separate futons was only the beginning. On another night, he found himself actively suffocating, Nejire having somehow twisted herself into a loose chokehold in her sleep. That had been his final straw. I refuse to sleep with that woman any longer. Ishan complained to Keiko while she and Genzei helped Shiori prepare breakfast. Keiko merely looked at him with amusement, casually handing a washed bell pepper to Genzei to cut. Why not? She asked, smiling. Ishan raised an eyebrow, utterly incredulous. Why not? Just look at the past few days. He protested. I wake up with no blankets, and this morning I almost died from being strangled in my sleep. Keiko and Genzei both chuckled, and Genzei shrugged. Shun-kun, can't you be the bigger person? Bigger person? Ishan echoed flatly. No. Nejire is obviously the bigger person. Maybe a little too big. He gestured with his eyes toward the living room. Nejire was sitting in front of the TV, completely engrossed in a local hero versus villain battle taking place in Akita City. She was happily munching on the strawberries Shiori had set out, her cheeks puffed out as she ate. As if she could feel Ishan looking at her, Nejire turned and met his gaze, immediately lighting up. She waved enthusiastically and patted the spot beside her. Ishan's expression settled into a grimace. He'd only managed to escape earlier by claiming he needed to use the restroom, using the opportunity to complain to Keiko instead. "See?" he said. That earned him nothing but fond smiles from the adults in the kitchen. "Why is it that every time I try to complain, I get that look?" Ishan thought irritably. "Well, don't worry too much, Shun-kun," Shiori chuckled, placing another bowl of strawberries into his hands. "Maybe Nejire-chan's just excited that she gets to play with you all day. She'll probably calm down soon." "Is that so?" Ishan didn't get the chance to say anything else before Nejire grabbed his wrist and dragged him back to the TV. He gave up almost immediately. Thankfully, Shiori turned out to be right. Even a hyperactive child like Nejire couldn't go plus ultra for weeks on end. So instead of constantly running around the village, Ishan and Nejire spent the rest of their days helping the Hato family with their strawberry fields and other farms in the village. With his teleportation quirk, Ishan was greatly appreciated throughout the village, a fact that didn't surprise him in the slightest. By the time summer break ended, the Shunkin family returned home with enough strawberries and vegetables to last them quite a while. After that summer break, nothing particularly important happened. Elementary school was as boring as ever. If anything had changed, it was Ishan himself. He began experimenting with different ways to increase his computational abilities, pushing his mind the same way others trained their quirks. Instead of letting his computational ability passively grow, maybe actively utilizing his computational abilities would help in increasing his computational abilities. He studied new languages while solving advanced math problems, all while memorizing human anatomy, forcing his brain to multitask under constant strain. Still, for a long time, life remained uneventful. If there was one notable discovery, it was that Ishan could artificially increase the effective distance of both his teleportation and omniscient domain. For context, both Ishan's and Genzei's bodies were built differently from most people's. Enhanced senses meant denser, more numerous nerves throughout their bodies. One side effect of this was slow hair growth. Extremely slow. His hair never shed either. Ishan hadn't actually noticed this until Genzei pointed it out. Lacking confidence in choosing a hairstyle, Ishan hadn't cut a single strand of hair since he was born, and even then, it only reached his armpits. He had already decided that he wouldn't touch it unless he was 100% sure he wouldn't regret it. Unfortunately, Ishan had a devil's advocate for a friend. After hearing him complain several times about his bangs blocking his vision, Nejire enthusiastically volunteered to cut them for him. Well, the rest was history. Surprisingly, it didn't look half bad. Unfortunately, both of them were scolded by both sets of parents that day. Ishan, thinking it would be a waste to throw away hair that took forever to grow, stuffed it into a plastic bag. Imagine his surprise when he went to school the next day and instinctively knew where that bag was and the area around that bag. After some experimentation, Ishan realized that if enough of his DNA was concentrated in one location, it acted like a marker, kind of like a small omniscient domain separate from the one centered on himself. That discovery surprised him, but it was a pleasant one. The radius of the smaller domain was only about 2 meters, but it was enough to bypass the distance limit of his teleportation. Still, as interesting as it was, Ishan couldn't be bothered to investigate further if it meant cutting more of his hair. Lying down on his bed after deciding to revisit the issue only once he settled on a proper hairstyle, he sighed, then immediately sat back up. When he opened the curtains, instead of the usual bright, energetic face of Nejire, he was met with something different. She looked sad. Nejire accurately tossed the blueberry vanilla phone MK.109 into Ishan's hands, 3 years of experience showing in the throw. When Ishan raised the cup to his ear, an uncharacteristically quiet voice came through. "Shun-chan," Nejire said softly. "I think I might be moving away when I graduate. A/N, just in case ages are a bit confusing. Ishan is now in 4th grade and Nejire is in 6th, so she's going to graduate elementary school soon. Also, I saw some comments about the leap in logic. It quite, but when I was writing I thought it made sense, but looking at the comments I low-key saw how short-sighted I was. I said UA would start by chap 30, but my chapters are shorter than I thought. There's too many arcs I'm planning before UA, so maybe chap 30 is a little too soon. Sready about that. More characters will be introduced though, so it'll not be boring, I hope. But for now, the childhood arc is done. There'll be an interlude chap from Nejire's POV and then pre-adolescence will start. Thanks for reading. Chapter 23, Interlude, Heido Nejire. Heido Nejire was the darling of her hometown. Well, she was the only child in her hometown, so there wasn't much competition in the first place. Still, life as the only child in a small village wasn't bad. With her ever-energetic personality and constant eagerness to help, Nejire was doted on by everyone around her. So while she was sad about moving, especially since the reason was Mitsuru getting a job in the city, all the way in Tokyo Prefecture, the very next thought that popped into her head was the city. That meant kids her age. Friends her age. Overflowing with curiosity about city life and new people, Nejire arrived in the neighborhood practically vibrating with excitement, ready to make friends the moment they finished moving in. Almost immediately, she rushed over to greet the neighbors and rang the doorbell of the house next door. Silence. Maybe no one's home, she thought. But the house's architecture was different from hers, more city-like, and that alone was enough to keep her interest. Even without an answer, Nejire's curiosity got the better of her. Using her quirk to boost herself upward, she bounced lightly along the side of the house until she found a window that wasn't blocked by curtains. Curiosity 1. I'll just take a quick look. She wasn't great at flying yet, but she could hover well enough. Carefully wobbling into place, she steadied herself and peeked inside. Someone's inside. Inside was a child around her age. The first thing Nejire noticed was their shoulder-length, messy, vanilla-colored hair. Her hair looks kind of tasty. Having barely interacted with kids her own age before, Nejire worked off some very simple assumptions. Long hair meant girl, short hair meant boy. It was the same way she'd once thought everyone's parents were just called mom and dad, and all grandparents were grandpa and grandma. Why didn't she answer the door? Nejire wondered. Oh. Maybe they just didn't hear it. That line of thinking made sense. What didn't make sense was what she did next. She knocked loudly on the window. Inside, the child turned around, startled, and locked eyes with her. Wow, she's pretty. The child's white gold soft eyes and long eyelashes immediately reinforced Nejire's assumption that this was definitely a girl. We already have so much in common. Her desire to talk to them skyrocketed. Balancing herself against the wall, Nejire waved enthusiastically whenever she didn't need to focus on not falling. After a moment of hesitation, the vanilla-haired child awkwardly waved back. A few seconds later, the child placed a cushion on the floor beneath the window and opened it, clearly inviting her inside. When Nejire heard the child speak, his voice flat and deadpan, her assumptions shattered instantly. So it was a boy. Are all city people's genders this confusing? She didn't say that out loud, of course. Instead, realizing her first thing in common had been completely wrong, Nejire did what came naturally to her. She decided she just needed to learn more and find new things they shared. And that was how Heido Nejire met Shunken Ishan. After that first meeting, Nejire was perfectly satisfied with just this one friend. He knew everything. Anything Nejire asked, whether it was about food, quirks, or even homework, Ishan always had an answer. Not always enthusiastically, and not always nicely, but always somewhat accurately. He played with her. He accompanied her. He helped her, sometimes. Ishan was a kind person. Even if he wasn't always a nice person. He knew when Nejire was curious. He knew when she was bored. He knew when to step in and help often before she even asked. Ishan was her quintessential partner. She had friends at school, but being around them felt different. Like they were being nice to her, instead of being nice with her. Even if it wasn't fair to expect children to be socially aware, Nejire could subconsciously tell the difference between how Ishan treated her and how her classmates did. They were the blueberry vanilla duo for a reason. With the exception of her parents, Ishan was her number one. Grandpa Moriyama had suddenly gone to a faraway place. Was what her mom had told her. That was the first time Nejire learned that people could leave without saying goodbye. When is he coming back? Nejire asked. Shiori could only answer with a somewhat forced smile. Nejire-chan, he's not coming back. Why? She had asked. Because. Mitsuru said gently, placing a hand on Nejire's shoulder, he had to go get something precious. Will I ever play with Grandpa Moriyama again? Yes, Mitsuru said after a pause, smiling. You'll play with him again. How long do I have to wait? Nejire wondered aloud. She hoped it wouldn't be long. A long time. A long time. How long is that? Nejire wondered. How long? A long time. I hope I don't have to wait too long. While it was disappointing that Grandpa Moriyama had gone so far away so suddenly, there wasn't much she could do about it. Maybe if she got strong enough, she could go wherever he was faster. But the sudden farewell planted a stray thought in her head. If Grandpa Moriyama left so suddenly, what's stopping Shunchan from leaving suddenly too? Shunchan was her partner. If he went somewhere, she had to follow. To prevent Ishan from disappearing without her knowing, it was best if she could keep an eye on him at all times. After she reassured herself that Ishan wasn't going to vanish like Grandpa Moriyama, life returned to normal. Then one day, during a rare outing with just her parents, they broke the news. Nejire-chan, you know how I work for a company. MHM. She replied, happily chewing on her favorite hamburger steak. Mitsuru hesitated. He knew how attached she was to Ishan. He'd even found himself looking forward to their future together. Being the reason she'd have to separate from him, Mitsuru couldn't help but pause. But Shiori didn't let the moment drag on. Nejire-chan, sweetie, we're moving. Moving. Nejire tilted her head. Are we moving the furniture again? No, Shiori said gently. We're moving away from the neighborhood. Hey. Chapter 24, Pre-Adolescence, Prologue. I think I might be moving away when I graduate. That was enough to make Ishan raise an eyebrow. Nejire's moving away. There was a faint sense of loss, but moving away was just a part of life, something Ishan was already familiar with. Wait, why is she so sad about it? So, where are you moving? Ishan asked. You're not sad. Even if Nejire and Ishan were practically inseparable, knowing that her number one didn't look sad about her leaving was enough to sting. Her voice wavered just slightly. At her tone, one that clearly was a warning sign she'd spiral further if he didn't explain, Ishan quickly added. Wait. I am sad, but I obviously need more information. Ishan said through the cup. And also, did you just forget my ability? The moment he finished speaking, Ishan teleported along with the entire cup phone onto the windowsill. He looked down at Nejire, both cups now in his hands, her eyes glossy with tears. Nejire blinked up at him in surprise. Ishan sighed, teleporting a tissue into his hand and gently wiping away the tears clinging to her cheeks. Seeing his unmistakable "what am I going to do with you" expression, Nejire felt her face heat up, a small blush creeping across her cheeks. She offered weakly, then paused. Wait, but you almost never use it publicly. It's totally normal that I forgot, right? She complained loudly. That's not even a valid argument, Ishan replied flatly. I've shown you this for, the past 3 years. That shut her up immediately. Her sadness was quickly buried under embarrassment. Thankfully, Ishan wasn't foolish enough to let the silence fester. So, he prompted, where are you moving? Nejire sniffled, whatever tears remained making it hard for her to speak clearly. Without missing a beat, Ishan teleported another tissue and held it up to her nose. Blow into it. I'm not a child. Nejire protested, but she did it anyway. After getting the snot out and teleporting it into the trash can, Ishan looked at Nejire, waiting for a response. I don't know. Now that she really thought about it, her parents hadn't given her any details. Just knowing she'd be moving away from Ishan had been more than enough to upset her. Are you serious? Ishan muttered, slapping his forehead. My mom only told me we're moving when I graduate. Nejire shot back. How was I supposed to know more if she didn't tell me? So you didn't bother asking, Ishan said slowly. That silenced Nejire. I'll be right back, Shun-chan. Nejire chose the wisest option available, retreating from a losing argument. As she bolted out of the room, Ishan glanced around, his thoughts drifting. He was very familiar with the layout of Nejire's room. Mostly because she'd complained more than once about why they always hung out in his room when hers was an option too. Her room was surprisingly neat, almost sparse for someone with Nejire's personality. Her bookshelf held a few elementary-level textbooks from school, alongside several art books. Those had started appearing after she realized Ishan's cup designs were far better than hers. Once she'd discovered she enjoyed art more than expected, she'd gone all in, buying supplies whenever she could. This was when Ishan found himself at a very artistic time in his life, which, in his case, meant he was taking a break from learning new languages. Ishan could probably get certified as a plumber, electrician, carpenter, or even a cybersecurity specialist if he really wanted to. In fact, he had earned plenty of online certificates, anywhere he could find them. Collecting them had become something like a game. Most of them relied more on memorization than true mastery, but still. Next to the books was a display shelf lined with all the cups they'd exchanged over the years. Small notes were placed beneath the more meaningful ones. First exchanged cup. First year anniversary cup. And so on. Ishan's own collection was organized the same way, so he couldn't exactly judge. Her bed was covered with a custom blanket he'd made for her 10th birthday, after learning how to sew. The underside was patterned like a waffle cone, while the top was a soft vanilla color dotted with blueberry accents. Ishan couldn't be bothered to make a small blanket just for her to outgrow it, so it looked almost comically large compared to the bed. In the corner was a big plushie he made for her 11th birthday, which was just another rendition of a blueberry vanilla ice cream, but instead of it just being vanilla topped with blueberries, it was a mix of vanilla colors and blueberry colors, topped with blueberries. Nearby were several dolls she'd received from her friends at school, or so she liked to brag. Ishan couldn't say much. The only person who ever really spoke to him was Tokage Setsuna, and that was mostly because she'd been class representative for what felt like 3 years straight. Ishan's rather quiet personality seemed to not mesh with his classmates that well, and Ishan didn't bother actively trying to make any friends either. Grinding certificates was far more efficient than making friends. Friends only slowed down his grinding speed. There were occasional moments when he got dragged into boy talk against his will, fantasizing and speculation that made his skin crawl. He felt no attraction to kids whatsoever, so his only response was a blunt, "I don't know." That answer never satisfied anyone, but Ishan wasn't interested in humoring them. The only reason that Ishan wasn't even made fun of or actively bullied were 2 reasons. 1. He was a little too beautiful, so there was naturally a decent amount of bad attention if someone did. 2. He wouldn't bother entertaining them if they did. If there wasn't a satisfying enough reaction for some kids, there was no reason to interact with what they considered an emotional rock. After a few minutes, Nejire burst back into the room, confidence radiating from her. It had taken her a while to memorize the name of the place, which explained the delay, but now she was beaming. "I found out where we're going," she announced, planting her hands on her hips. All traces of sadness were gone. "So?" Ishan asked. "Where are you moving?" "Musu, She froze. "Oh no. She forgot it already. I'll be right back." Her confidence immediately crumbled as she darted back toward the door. "Musudafu," Ishan offered. "Yet. That one." Nejire nodded enthusiastically. Ishan nodded in return. "That's pretty far. It's a different prefecture, too." They currently lived in Saitama, still within the greater Tokyo area. Musudafu, located in Shizuoka, was far southwest by comparison. Ishan only remembered it clearly because UA High School was located there. With Ishan confirming the distance, Nejire's confidence wavered again. "Does that mean you won't be able to come see me?" "Well, no." Ishan was still smaller than Nejire, so he had to reach up, but he still ruffled Nejire's hair. "Really? I've never seen you teleport that far before." "Well, that's because I technically can't," Ishan inwardly thought. But with what he'd recently discovered about his hair. Just look forward to your graduation gift. Chapter 25, Pre-Adolescence, 1. Not long after Nejire's announcement, Ishan found himself sitting in front of both of his parents. "Am I about to get the birds and the bees talk?" That was, unfortunately, his first thought. Keiko opened her mouth first. "Shun-kun." "Yet." Ishan replied, glancing between them. "Did he do something wrong? Are you aware that Nejire-chan is moving away after she graduates?" Yet." Keiko first glanced at Genze with a smug expression, like she won a bet, but quickly turned back to Ishan. "Well, after Nejire-chan moves, we'll be moving too." What they? That was awfully convenient. But not to Musadafu, like Nejire-chan, Keiko clarified. I actually received a promotion a while back. The company wants me to head a new branch office in central Tokyo. She folded her arms lightly. I could refuse it or delay it, but honestly, the main reason we stayed here this long was because of our friendship with the Hato family. So? Ishan said, flattening it down to its simplest form, since Nejire's moving, we're moving too. Keiko nodded. Okay. Ishan shrugged. I don't really know what you want me to say. We just wanted to let you know ahead of time, Genzei added. So you'd have time to tell your friends at school. I don't have any friends, Ishan thought flatly, but obviously, that wasn't something he was going to say out loud. Well, okay, he said instead, giving a short nod. Truthfully, Ishan didn't feel much attachment to the school. With no close friends, there wasn't anyone he felt the need to say goodbye to. If anything, he was just relieved they weren't moving in the middle of the school year, as transfer student nonsense was a headache he didn't want to deal with. After getting the specifics from his parents, unlike Nejire, Ishan promptly told Nejire the news that night. For a brief moment, Nejire's eyes lit up when she heard that Ishan would be moving too, her posture straightening with excitement. But the moment he explained where, her shoulders sagged. Tokyo. She repeated quietly. Ishan had multiple ideas for Nejire's graduation gift. For one thing, just based on Nejire's personality, she would probably prefer it if the two of them matched in some way. Even though Ishan had reassured her more than once that they would still be able to meet after graduation, the fact that their time as neighbors was steadily ticking down, second by second, still weighed on Nejire. It made her nervous in a way she didn't quite know how to explain. With some enthusiastic recommendations from her friends at school, one particular concept started gaining traction, something that could keep Nejire spiritually connected to Ishan. Or at least, that was how they put it. As a result, Nejire had recently become enamored with the idea of matching jewelry. That much became obvious one day when after school ended, Nejire came after her home economics class, proudly holding up a pair of handmade friendship bracelets and talking a mile a minute about how cute matching accessories were. The knowing looks Ishan got from his mother that day were irritating, but they also gave him an idea. After asking Shiori for some of Nejire's hair, which was an awkward conversation for everyone involved, Ishan got to work. He taught himself the basics of CAD software, consulted his parents for their opinions, and managed to put together a rough prototype surprisingly quickly. As for the actual string of the piece, the solution was simpler than expected. Using his hair in its raw state felt unsettling, even to him, so instead he fused it through his teleportation quirk, thickening it into something closer to a durable cord rather than something thin and stringy. Once his hair had been condensed down to roughly the width of a thick guitar string, and after confirming that it still counted as sufficient DNA to maintain a Nejire-sized domain, Ishan nodded to himself, satisfied. He'd put more thought into this gift than he probably realized. First, it had to be growth-resistant. He didn't want to waste time modifying it later just because Nejire grew or changed. Second, it couldn't be something that might accidentally fall off. And lastly, it couldn't inconvenience her during hero work or daily life. After weighing all of that, Ishan settled on a necklace. It was simple in looks, secure, and practical all in one. And most importantly, something that Nejire could keep close to her. A week before Nejire's graduation. This was Ishan's first time actually wearing his own set, and he couldn't help but scrutinize it. This necklace looks like I put way too much effort into it. He held it up to the light, watching it reflect off the yellow gemstone set into the cup-shaped charm. The one meant for Nejire had a blue gemstone in the same style of setting. Even though his family was solidly upper-middle class, Ishan had never been someone who liked spending money unless it was on food. For the gemstones, he'd simply bought cheap, uncut ones and shaped them himself using teleportation before placing them directly into the charm. The charm itself was silver, but even that had been done by cheating, using small amounts of sterling silver bought separately and then fused together with teleportation. All things considered, he'd spent less than $30 on the entire graduation gift. All hail teleportation! And yet, staring at the finished necklace, Ishan couldn't shake the feeling that it still looked excessive. Maybe I should get a second opinion. He headed downstairs, where Keiko was sitting in the living room with her laptop open. Mom. Keiko glanced up from the screen. Ishan sat down beside her on the couch and pulled out both necklaces and handed them over. Wow, the quality on this, Keiko thought immediately as she felt the cord and examined the silver charm. Nejire-chan is so spoiled. What a lucky girl. But when she looked up and noticed Ishan's genuinely worried expression, she frowned slightly and glanced back down at the necklaces. Is something wrong with them, she wondered, inspecting them more carefully. They looked perfectly fine, even better than fine, honestly. Like most things Ishan made. Don't you think this looks way too overboard? Ishan asked. Keiko raised an eyebrow. Is that really what you are worried about? She said, incredulous. No, look, Ishan continued, gesturing at the charm. Doesn't it look really expensive? Maybe I should just take the charm out, he muttered, already thinking through revisions. I mean, I kind of agree, Keiko thought, but compare this to your past birthday presents for Nejire-chan and tell me if this is where you draw the line. She wisely kept that to herself. Shun-kun. Do you think Nejire-chan would be happy with this? She'd be happy with whatever I give her, Ishan replied honestly. But yet. She would. And you still wonder why I ship you two, Keiko sighed internally. Such an unfairly wholesome relationship. Then what's the problem? She asked gently. Ishan paused, then nodded to himself. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Thanks, Mom. Keiko smiled and closed her laptop. That's only natural. Nejire's graduation ended anticlimactically. Well, it was only elementary school. After the ceremony, the Hado and Shunken families celebrated with a group dinner. Even though they did that multiple times a week anyway. Once the Hados had left, Nejire rushed to her room, already eager to call Ishan. After all, Shun-chan had told her to look forward to her graduation gift, but every time she asked during the day, he'd just said after dinner. Now that dinner was over, her anticipation was at an all-time high. She opened her window, letting in the cool spring air, and spotted Ishan in his room already, holding a small box. At his signal, Nejire stepped back as Ishan teleported onto the windowsill. What's my graduation gift, Shun-chan? She asked brightly. Ishan handed her the wrapped box. Nejire tore it open, revealing a necklace. How pretty! The braided cord intertwined vanilla and periwinkle. The cup-shaped charm held a blue gemstone where liquid might have been. As Nejire looked closer, her eyes widened. Ah! She gasped with realization. She glanced at her bookshelf, at the very first cup phone they'd ever exchanged. The drawings and the engraving were the same. How did Shun-chan even? She turned back to Ishan, who leaned against the window with an amused look. Shun-chan. Yet. Thank you. She rushed forward and wrapped him in a tight hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Nejire repeated, emotion in her voice, her hug getting tighter. Thank you so much, Shun-chan, Nejire mumbled. Whoa, don't get too excited, Ishan huffed, smiling despite himself. It was always nice to see someone appreciate your gift. After a moment, she pulled back, still clutching the necklace. Can you put it on for me? Sure. Taking the necklace from Nejire's hands and putting it around her, Nejire just belatedly noticed that on Ishan's neck was a similar necklace. We're matching. Yep. Ishan nodded, finishing putting on Nejire's necklace. Ishan backed up and looked at Nejire, who walked up to the mirror to see how it looked on her with satisfaction. As expected of me. But that isn't all, Ishan started, getting the attention of Nejire, who was still admiring the necklace. That's not all. Nejire looked at Ishan in surprise. There was more. Well, it's just a feature of the necklace, Ishan clarified. Not a new present. Oh. Don't be so disappointed yet. Ishan shook his head in amusement at Nejire's changing expressions. If you call my name or need my help, I'll be there. That got Nejire to pause, registering what Ishan said. Really? She asked hopefully. Really? Really, really? Yes, really, really. Real. If you say it one more time, I'm taking it back. She immediately shut up, then hugged him again, relief washing over her. Thank you, Shun-chan. Chapter 26, Pre-Adolescence, 2. Ishan had created a new set of formulas specifically for Nejire's necklace. The omniscient domain generated through accumulated DNA didn't fade the way the one originating directly from Ishan did. Within a 2-meter radius of the necklace, Ishan could detect everything inside that space. Beyond those 2 meters, however, his perception cut off completely. While Ishan had given the necklace to Nejire both for protection and as a way to call him, that didn't mean he wanted to be monitoring her constantly. That would just be an invasion of privacy. So instead, Ishan built in a trigger. The formulas would only activate if something moved into that space. Even then, he would only check on the necklace when that condition was met. If nothing entered the range, he wouldn't pay attention to it at all. As for Nejire calling him if someone was loud enough within that radius, Ishan could hear it. That was more than sufficient. Not even a full day after graduation, the Hato family made their way to Musudafu. Ishan, meanwhile, would be heading to Tokyo by tomorrow. 2 hours after saying goodbye to Nejire at the station, Ishan was helping Genzei pack up the house, mostly because he'd finished packing his own things in about 5 minutes. He had essentially done the job of a moving company, condensing the entirety of the house into neatly packed, secured boxes. "Thank you, Shun-kun. You'll get double your allowance this week," Genzei said, nodding approvingly as he surveyed the packed house. "Nice," Ishan replied, equally satisfied. Before he could add anything else, a familiar voice echoed inside his head. "Shun-cheon." Ishan tilted his head, confused. He set a box down and made sure there was enough hair on it to serve as a teleport waypoint. It wouldn't do to forget anchoring his original location. He glanced at Genzei, the only other person home, since Keiko was off signing what she'd described as a bajillion moving papers for their new Tokyo apartment. "I'll be right back." Before Genzei could respond, Ishan teleported away. He reappeared in a bare room filled wall to wall with boxes. Ishan barely finished scanning the area before something slammed into him. "It really works!" Nejire exclaimed, glomping onto him in an enthusiastic hug. Keeping himself steady to prevent himself from falling over, Ishan looked at Nejire with an exasperated expression. "Is that really what you called me here for?" Nejire released him and shook her head quickly. "Nope. Wanna have a house tour? Isn't your house basically empty?" Ishan thought, but he nodded anyway. "Sure." Nejire grabbed his hand and dragged him out of her second-floor room, proudly pointing out the master bedroom before bounding downstairs. In the living room, Shiori and Mitsuru were still talking with the movers about furniture placement. They looked up when Nejire and Ishan came down the stairs. Mitsuru raised an eyebrow in confusion. "Shun-kun? How are you?" He trailed off, but just decided not to think about it further, just attributing it to Ishan's teleportation abilities. Shiori, on the other hand, immediately squished Nejire's cheeks. "Couldn't you wait until we were done moving in before inviting Shun-kun over, Nejire-chan?" she said, half exasperated, half amused. "Ehe." Nejire mumbled, clearly embarrassed now that she was really looking around at all the boxes. "Do you need help, auntie?" Ishan asked. "I could probably." Shiori shook her head and smiled, pressing 2 5,000 yen bills into their hands. "Leave this to the adults. We can't be lazy at our age, after all," she joked, gently ushering them toward the door. "Go explore the neighborhood." That immediately lit Nejire up. "Okay. Just be back before dinner, all right?" Both kids nodded. Ishan quickly texted his parents to let them know he'd be out with Nejire, then turned his phone off. "So?" Nejire beamed. "Where should we go first, Shun-chan? Did you eat lunch yet?" She shook her head. "Just a snack on the Shinkansen. There's a snack market nearby," Ishan said. "I'm pretty sure." After 3 years, Ishan's original range had grown exponentially. Ishan attributed it to constantly using his brain power, but who knew what the real reason behind it was? At baseline, his omniscient domain now had a radius of 2 kilometers. That was what 3 years of non-stop use had earned him. If he pushed himself and focused solely on distance, his theoretical maximum stretched to 4 kilometers. So locating nearby convenience stores, restaurants, and public bathrooms was effortless. Unfortunately, so was noticing a mugging happening in an abandoned alley roughly 973 meters southeast. This neighborhood is more dangerous than I thought. A mugging in broad daylight was absurd to Ishan. In his own neighborhood, there hadn't been any criminal activity within his range at all. With a single thought, he intervened. The mugger abruptly vanished. While obviously Ishan didn't kill him, the mugger's body was essentially buried underground, with only his head poking out. Ishan could have done far worse. He could have obviously fused the concrete with the mugger, which would have resulted in a rather painful degloving experience, but, he was just in a rather nice mood today. She had been supposed to be an easy target. Entering an abandoned alley with nothing but a hand purse. He'd been born with the perfect quirk for intimidation. Blade body. Any limb on his body could be reshaped into a blade. While he didn't have the guts to actually murder someone, mugging through intimidation was something he could easily do. After all, it was easy money. The mugging went smoothly as it should have been. While her immediately bursting into tears was a little annoying, it only made it easier for him. Yet the moment he was about to snatch her wallet out of her shaking hands, his perspective changed. What? He couldn't move. When his vision settled, he saw the woman standing far above him. Why is she so tall now? He tried to move, but his body refused to respond. Looking down, all he could see was concrete. He tensed his muscles, trying to move, but nothing changed. A sense of claustrophobia creeped up on him. Panic set in. The woman stumbled backward, eyes wide, before bolting from the alley without looking back. Hey! He shouted, forcing his voice deep, threatening. Call for help! Yet as if she hadn't heard, she quickly ran away from the alley, ignoring his pleading yells. Hey! He could only watch as the woman left. He tried activating his quirk and tried reshaping himself to make himself thinner, but nothing worked. He was completely stuck. Am I stuck like this forever? Help! Chapter 27, Pre-Adolescence, 3. Life before the new school year started went by relatively smoothly. Well, there were only 2 weeks of break before school resumed, but as far as things went, it was about as chill as it could get. Ishan's new neighbors in the recently moved into apartment building were mostly old couples. The people living above them were a family with a kid already in college. So, realistically, Ishan's only real concern, which was the neighbors upstairs being loud, was already settled. Additionally, during those 2 weeks, it felt like Ishan barely had time to stay home at all. Nejire called him every single day. After setting a minimum call time to prevent Nejire from waking him up way too early in the morning, Ishan finally put his attention toward what he internally dubbed the Nejire neighborhood purging plan. Well, after some thought, simply putting criminals straight into the ground felt a little too inefficient. For hidden crimes like muggings, Ishan set a routine: teleport a random officer's handcuffs directly onto the mugger's wrists, then send both the victim and the villain straight to the nearest police station. For the public acts of villainy like bank robberies, Ishan simply teleport them stuck into the ground, their heads popped out in view of the public. Of course, there was the philosophical argument of, if you stop a crime before it's fully committed, does the perpetrator still get charged? But even if they were eventually released, they would still remember the experience of being utterly powerless. After all, no matter how perfect Ishan's protection could be, only Nejire wore the necklace. And obviously, Ishan wasn't about to let Shiori or Mitsuru live in a neighborhood like that. So, as the friendly neighborhood teleporter, Ishan took it upon himself to make Nejire's area just a little less dangerous. As for being afraid of getting caught, that was basically impossible. Teleportation was the complete opposite of flashy. Its only defining feature was its perfection. Not to brag, of course. Ishan might come off as lazy and goalless, but that didn't mean he didn't enjoy a little aura farming. After all, wasn't that the peak of life? Shun-chan, does this look good on me? Nejire asked, twirling around in her brand new middle school sailor uniform. Yet, just yesterday she had been showing off her new twin spiral hairstyle. Today it was the uniform. Couldn't she have shown both at the same time? That didn't sound sincere at all. Nejire pouted. Well, unless you wore a literal trash bag, Ishan replied flatly, you'd probably look okay in anything. Is that a challenge? Nejire asked, eyes lighting up with curiosity. Where did you even get that idea? Ishan sighed, rubbing his temples. So would you say you're ready for middle school? Of course. Nejire nodded confidently, hands on her hips. I'm gonna make so many friends. So you have to make some too, okay? Yet. Musutafu Police Force East Precinct. Any leads? None. Bang. Damn it. The police major slammed his hand down on the meeting room table. 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since a new vigilante appeared in East Musutafu. And in that short span of time, the number of villains captured in their jurisdiction had reached an absurd level. 300. 300 villains, all apprehended in just 2 weeks. Worse still, it was as if the vigilante was clocking into a 9-to-6 job. After capturing an average of 2 villains per hour throughout the day, nothing. As soon as the workday ended, they stopped. Not only that, but Blink, as the precinct had codenamed them, had also prevented over 20 traffic accidents and passively protected more than 100 civilians. People who were about to fall, collide with something, or otherwise get hurt were saved without even realizing it. Blink seemingly covered the entire jurisdiction and then some. After all, if you blinked, you wouldn't even realize anything had happened. Their efficiency was peerless. And it only highlighted how incompetent both the precinct and the area's heroes looked by comparison. Before anyone could even finish calling a hero, the incident was already over. Recently, some heroes had even started complaining that they didn't have enough work. Yet, as soon as the clock hit 6, as if Blink was Cinderella, they stopped capturing villains. As a result, villains who quickly got the memo had started their crimes at night. That led to a surge in complaints from heroes forced to take more night shifts, and the increased danger only worsened conditions for heroes whose quirks weren't suited for low visibility. So while the city was nearly spotless during the day, nightfall only made things more dangerous. Having heroes take constant night shifts wasn't viable either. Which meant one thing. This law-breaking vigilante had to be caught. However, there was one glaring issue. Blink possessed a spatial type quirk. Not only was it a normal spatial type quirk, but it was instant, hence the code name. With no visible drawbacks and no detectable traces, the precinct had no idea where to even begin. The only information they had was the code name itself. The profile folder for Blink contained a blank photo and a single note. Active from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. That was it. How were they supposed to work with that? It was like chasing a ghost. Undetectable, unseeable, and untrackable. And yet, the police major was constantly being hounded by higher UPS demanding updates. He had nothing to give them. Let's see you try to catch this guy. They'd even brought in tracking-type heroes to analyze the villains Blink captured, but there was nothing. No new scent, no residue, nothing. Nada. It was enough to give him a migraine. At this point, the major was half considering waiting until the main police force finally realized how futile the chase was. UA. Hai was also located in Musutafu. Maybe they could enlist some help. After all, he'd heard U.A.'s principal was a pro-hero with an intelligence-type quirk. And right now, without any leads, just going off of conjectures was their best bet. Chapter 28, Pre-Adolescence, 4. Why is this bullshit a thing? That was Ishan's train of thought as he waited for the homeroom teacher to introduce him and another transfer student. Apparently, the school Keiko had enrolled him and didn't rotate students between classes every year and kept the same homeroom teacher for all 6 years of elementary school. Unfortunately, that meant the cliché transfer student introduction Ishan despised was about to happen. If there was a silver lining, it was that he wasn't the only transfer student. Ishan had heard, eavesdropped, that the class Ishan was transferring into had a few students transfer out for bullying. Bullying. Oh. My mom has quite literally chosen the worst school possible. Still, it was the closest elementary school to home, so complaining wouldn't get him anywhere. Why were elementary schoolers bullying each other anyway? What has society come to? Hello. Ishan glanced to his right, and found himself face to face with nothing. Not even a ghost, just empty space where he expected a head. Like an invisible mannequin wearing a sailor-style uniform. It took him a second to realize the girl herself was invisible. Sight, for Ishan, was more of an auxiliary sense, something he relied on mostly out of habit rather than necessity. So when he'd been expecting a messy-haired, bright-eyed girl, he instead found visually nothing at all. Hello. Hi. The girl smiled. You're a transfer student too, right? Ishan nodded. What's your name? She asked brightly. I'm Hagakure Toru. Damn. I think I know who this is. When Ishan had watched My Hero Academia, he wasn't great with names, usually remembering people by standout features or their quirks. Still, there was that one running agenda he remembered about Hagakure. Is that a beam attack? My name's Shunken Ishan. Nice to meet you, Shunken-kun. Toru spun in place, as if proudly showing herself off. My quirk is invisibility, if you couldn't tell, hee. I couldn't. Ishan wasn't particularly eager to make new friends, but he knew that since Nejire had moved away, his parents were worried he'd end up isolated at school. And while he was introverted, he wasn't allergic to social interaction. So he decided that at least one acquaintance would be enough to keep his parents from worrying. Connections usually formed through shared circumstances anyway. Becoming acquaintances with Toru would check that box. Not much of a talker, hey? But yet, people usually hey. Toru paused before realizing what Ishan had said, then gasped. Wait. You can see me. Ishan nodded. Once he realized Toru was visually undetectable, curiosity had kicked in, and he'd instinctively focused his omniscient domain on her. For the record, Ishan's maximum high accuracy range was a 2-kilometer radius in every direction with a theoretical maximum of 4. That meant his domain covered roughly 33.5 cubic kilometers normally. The level of detail he perceived depended on how concentrated his focus was. Compressing his domain down to a volume of 5 cubic centimeters effectively gave him something like a 600,000 times zoom. Seeing individual cells only required about 400x zoom. Just based on the beam attack agenda he had chuckled at, Ishan could assume that Toru's quirk wasn't just invisibility as she had introduced, but light refraction. This curiosity prompted his investigation. Looking closer, he saw that each and every one of her cells possessed a unique mutation, a secondary membrane surrounding the plasma membrane that refracted light. That membrane had a limit, though there was only so much light it could redirect before it was fully saturated, like a battery hitting maximum capacity. In theory, if that membrane were overloaded, Toru would become visible for a short time until that stored light depleted naturally. Regardless of all that technical detail, Ishan already knew what she looked like. Before Toru could say anything else, the teacher stepped back into the room. Hagakure-chan, Shunkin-kun. You can come in and introduce yourselves. Oh. Toru followed the teacher in, clearly disappointed at being interrupted. Yes, ma'am. As Ishan entered the classroom, he was met with the stares of curious children. Ignoring Toru, who was supposed to be focusing on her introduction that she had prepared for but kept glancing at him every few seconds, Ishan bowed. Their names were already written on the board, so all he needed to do was speak. Hello. My name is Shunkin Ishan. My quirk is mathematics. That was the name they'd settled on. Originally, Ishan had proposed personal reality, but Genzei thought it sounded too metaphysical. Since Ishan used mathematical formulas to teleport, mathematics was vague enough to work. It was ambiguous enough to encompass a wide variety of subjects. Letting other people speculate about what his quirk actually did was part of the strategy. Toru wore an invisibly confused expression, at least, visible to Ishan. Mathematics didn't exactly explain how he could see her. The teacher led the class in applause, and Ishan stepped aside so Toru could introduce herself. If invisibility had one perk, it was that no one could see your expressions. So no one noticed how Toru snapped back to attention, and the small blush on her face as if she was caught being distracted. Well, with the sole exception of Shunkin Ishan, of course. Name's Hagakure Toru. Nice to meet you all. Since she was invisible, Toru exaggerated her movements to get her emotions across. As you can see or can't see my quirk's invisibility. Please take care of me. She finished with an over-the-top bow, earning noticeably louder applause. Nice to meet you both, the teacher said, gesturing toward 2 empty seats by the window. You can decide which one you'd like. I don't mind either one, Ishan said immediately. Now both of them looked at Toru, who hummed in thought, before picking the window seat. As they sat down, Ishan ignored the lingering stares from his classmates. You might be excited to have new friends, the teacher added, but please save your questions for after first period. How? Interesting. Nizu stared at the information displayed across the database he had quietly hacked into. While the police force hadn't requested his assistance even with a vigilante running rampant through Musudafu, the very city UA was located in Nizu couldn't suppress his curiosity regarding this new figure. There were several reasons for that curiosity. The first was simple wariness. All Might had only recently fought All for One, and though the battle ended in victory, it had been a Pyrrhic one. If All Might couldn't recover, then the public safety of Japan was under threat. Now, a vigilante with a spatial type quirk powerful enough to capture 300 criminals in the span of 2 weeks had appeared. In Musudafu, no less. That alone was enough to prompt Nizu to begin his own investigation. Yet aside from narrowing down Blink's general area of activity, there was little else to go on. Nizu had analyzed every accessible camera in that region, reviewed timestamps, cross-referenced incident reports. And still, all he could do was quietly applaud the efficiency of Blink's quirk. There were no errors, traces, and no predictable patterns other than location. Unless new information surfaced or unless Nizu resorted to a brute force investigation that would take far too long, he had reached a dead end. However, that Monday, Blink had vanished. Or rather, he hadn't intervened in a single crime that day. Even accounting for the natural dip in crime rates during daylight hours, Nizu had been monitoring every camera within Blink's usual operating range. Petty crimes still occurred. Normally, that was when Blink would strike. Yet, today? There was nothing. Nizu thought of every possible reason behind this absence before thinking of the most probable. As an educator, it was a time of month he knew all too well. Is Blink? Nizu murmured softly, a smile slowly curling across his face. Perhaps a student. A/N, I hope Nizu's conjecture isn't an asshole, cause it's still just a guess. Also, while Nizu is introduced here, it'll take longer to him to officially be introduced to MC. Cause even if he has a probable lead, it's like narrowing a multiple-year search to like a 1 to 2 year search. Also, just cause Hagakure is introduced does not mean this is harem. One person all the way, remember that. It's just that the process and end is still under development. Small author Q&A section. I saw some comments about why big PS goals for small chaps and why some PS goals are so high and increasing. I thought I explained it, but I guess I wasn't clear enough. The reason I enjoy writing is to see everyone's comments and readers growing attached to the story. One of the ways I can see that is PS and big numbers make me feel nice and creates determination, and giving extra chaps in return gives me a feeling of giving back to my supportive readers. Extra chaps, in my opinion, are supposed to be a nice reward after everyone puts in their hopes and dreams, or something like that, and evolve beyond the person they were a minute before. The first goal is supposed to be reachable, and the second is the one where you guys break your limits. I don't know why y'all's determination's so strong though. Plus, why are my extra chaps short? I think my extra chaps are similar in length to my normal chaps, so it's what you mean by short. I don't have the attention span to write for so long cause I type slowly in addition to college stuff. So unless it's a blue moon, then chaps will unfortunately naturally be shorter than others. Also, short chaps like these stress me out less when writing. Most of these decisions are done to prevent me from burning out and disappointing myself and you guys. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but isn't 3 chaps a week normally decent? Chapter 29, Pre-Adolescence, 5. So, what do I look like to you? During first period, Toru, who had been curious ever since Ishan mentioned he could see her, finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been eating at her all class. You look like a kid. And that's it. What does? Before Toru could complain any further, the bell signaling the end of first period rang. As if by divine intervention, she didn't even get the chance to follow up before their classmates swarmed them. Shunken, how does your quirk work? Does that mean you're good at math? Where are you from? At first, Ishan was the one crowded, as the person who sat in the aisle seat, but Ishan calmly but quickly answered their questions without much enthusiasm. I can solve problems faster. I'd say I'm pretty mediocre at math. Saitama. After his short, lackluster replies, some of their classmates drifted over to Toru instead. Hagakure, are you permanently invisible? Do you know what you look like? Where are you from? Unlike Ishan's perfunctory responses, Toru answered every question with her usual boundless energy. Yep. I don't think I can turn it off, so it's kind of a pain sometimes. I was born invisible, so I haven't got the chance to see myself. But... Toru lowered her voice at the last part, her excitement barely contained as she remembered Ishan saying he could see her. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally get the chance to know. I'm from Koto. My dad just got a promotion, so we had to move. The questions continued for a while, until their classmates eventually ran out of things to ask and seemed satisfied with the answers they'd gotten. As everyone returned to their seats, Toru finally found herself free. She raised a hand, ready to poke Ishan's side to get his attention, only to notice he was already glancing at her. So. Ring ring. Ugh. Interrupted for the third time that day, Toru groaned in frustration. She was dying to know what she looked like. Inwardly, Toru swore that if Ishan had been lying to her this whole time, she'd do whatever it took to bite him. When the lunch bell rang, Ishan hadn't even stood up to head toward the food cart before his sleeve was grabbed by an invisible hand. Shunkan-kun. I hope you have some time to spare for me. Sure. If you don't, hey. Toru paused, confused. Aren't we waiting in line for lunch anyway? Ishan gestured toward the food cart, which was being manned by 4 of their classmates. As transfer students, both of them were exempt from classroom chores for their first week. If there was a single benefit of being a transfer student, then that was it. I guess so. See. Toru quietly followed Ishan to the lunch line. After using my amazing brain, she said dramatically, arms moving around her head in a voodoo-type motion. I realized something. How can you even see me? She genuinely couldn't wrap her head around it. His quirk was just math. How did that let him see her? Was math that all-knowing? She wasn't great at math, but if it could help her visibility, she might, maybe, be willing to try. Math is everywhere if you look hard enough, Ishan said, opting to be cryptic. That tells me nothing. Toru whined. Ishan grabbed his miso soup, salad, tuna mayo sandwich, and a carton of milk before heading back to his seat. Toru sat down beside him. As he picked up his chopsticks with his left hand, Ishan pulled a notebook and pencil from his bag with the other. He opened to a page while eating his salad, completely unfazed. Toru froze. How are you doing that? Toru asked in amazement. Math. There's no way math lets you do that. Toru protested, then suddenly perked up. Wait, I have the perfect way to prove if you can really see me. MHM. She raised both hands, or rather, from everyone else's perspective, it looked like she was throwing her hands up in surrender. Ishan thought it kind of looked like the absolute cinema meme. How many fingers am I holding up? Toru asked confidently, nodding to herself. I must be a genius. 5. Oh. You got it right. But that's not enough. Toru said quickly. You could have just guessed, right? So we're doing this a bunch of times. Okay. 2. 1. 6. 9. 6 again. After a few more, Toru then put her hands behind her back, now seeing if Ishan could even make a mistake. 4. Wait. How did you even do that? I had it behind my back. Math. Darn it. Toru clenched her fists, half annoyed, half impressed. What started as verification had somehow turned into a game. Well, this one grudgingly believes you can see me, humph. She crossed her arms, punctuating it with an exaggerated huff. Hagakure Toru was born at a young age. Yet she was born invisible. Because of that, an entire layer of communication had been taken from her before she ever had a chance to learn it. People communicated using multiple aspects of their physical body. They relied on facial expressions, eye contact, subtle movements, things she simply couldn't use. Almost all of these were robbed of Toru from the start. In terms of the subtlety of human interactions, Toru was essentially mute. To compensate, she'd subconsciously made her voice more expressive and her gestures bigger. Exaggeration became her language. While it may have required a bit more effort on her end, it was still plenty effective. Of course, being so young, her ability to convey her emotions perfectly was still limited. Even so, despite trying to be nonchalant and confident like the heroes she admired, Toru couldn't help but feel a quiet thrill at the idea that someone could truly see her. She couldn't just let that go. Yet immediately asking for something felt a little wrong, and Toru believed her parents raised her right. I said I could see you, and I wouldn't just lie about that, Ishan shrugged, taking a spoonful of miso soup. You're not eating. He gestured toward Toru's untouched tray. Only then did Toru notice the time. After checking the clock and realizing she still had enough, she let out a relieved breath. She dug in quickly, eating with renewed focus before rubbing her stomach in satisfaction. So, Shunkan-kun. Let's say, someone I knew was invisible. You are invisible. If there was one thing Ishan disliked, it was this someone I knew bullshit. Toru awkwardly laughed at the interruption. What, do I really look like? Chapter 30, Pre-Adolescence, 6. What, do I really look like? Toru asked the question a little nervously, voicing what she'd wanted to know this entire time. Ishan hummed in thought. He lifted his pencil from the notebook he'd been sketching in and glanced toward where Toru's face would be, one eyebrow raised in consideration. What? Do I look fat? Toru asked quickly. Or do I look weird? You look annoying to draw. At the unfamiliar description, Toru couldn't help but tilt her head in confusion. Is that a bad thing? For some people. Maybe. Ugh, can't you just give me a clear answer? Toru waved her arms in frustration. I'll bite you. She bared her invisible teeth in what was meant to be a threatening manner. Ishan couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. Kinda reminds me of Nejire. Without comment, he handed his notebook to her. Ishan had insisted to Keiko that notebooks were pointless for someone with the processing and memorization power of multiple supercomputers, but she'd told him he should at least look like he was studying. Actually taking notes, however, was wildly inefficient. What's this for? Toru asked, opening it. On the first page was a pencil sketch of a girl wearing their school uniform. There was no color, but even Toru, whose artistic ability peaked at stick figures, could tell it was good. Like, really good. The girl looked like she was in motion, 3 fingers raised on both hands, a confident, lively expression on her face. Her hair was messy as if it hadn't been brushed properly and shoulder length, and the whole drawing carried the charm of a kid enjoying their youth. Who's this? Toru glanced up at Ishan, only to receive an incredulous look in return. Is this what I look like? Yet. Toru had always wondered what she looked like. She'd tried things before painting herself, for example, but that attempt had ended when her parents caught her flooding the bathroom. Yet now, with a visible picture-like drawing of what she looked like, her initial reaction wasn't surprise. Instead, she felt confused. Don't I look a little too cute? How narcissistic? Ishan drawled next to her. No, seriously. Toru gestured wildly between the drawing and herself, pushing her invisible hair around as if she could somehow compare the two. I could be a child actor. She looked back at Ishan. You're still invisible, he said flatly. Just so you know. I know that. Toru huffed. It's just a what if, you know. Yet. Maybe. Ishan shrugged. But, then. Ring. Ring. Ray. Toru threw her hands up in frustration. How many times was this stupid bell going to be interrupting her today? The math teacher walked in just as she was mid-frustration. Unfortunately, since she was invisible, it just looked like random, distracting waving. You in the back, hands down. Everyone get your textbooks out and go to page 13. Just cause it's the first day doesn't mean you can start slacking off. Oh. I forgot to put back my tray. Hagakure looked down, yet her lunch tray was nowhere in sight. Instead, there was her math textbook, and her notebook. What? She turned to her right. Ishan was sitting calmly, notebook back in his hands, looking like the most normal student in the room. PSST. Shunkan-kun, she whispered. Did you put the trays back? With his seemingly all-knowing math quirk, maybe he was behind it. Without looking at her, Ishan wrote something on an empty page and tilted it toward her. No. Hey? Then who did? She grabbed her pencil and scribbled furiously. Then who did? Ishan wrote below the no. Who knows? Maybe a ghost. Even I know ghosts don't exist. You must have done it. He wrote again. Caught. Hee, I knew it was you. So, how'd you do it? He paused. Then wrote. Math. Toru slammed her hands on the desk. She was so sick of that stupid excuse. Unfortunately, this caught the attention of the very strict math teacher. You in the back. That's a warning. Sorry sensei. After being scolded, Toru glared in Ishan's direction. He sat there like a model student, stupid calm face and all. I know you can see me. Ishan didn't react. Left unsatisfied, Toru reluctantly turned her attention back to class. As the final bell rang, Ishan stood up, ready to head straight home. Only to be stopped again. Why did you ignore me? Toru asked. Ignore you? Ishan replied. We were in class. You're supposed to pay attention. You weren't even taking notes. Toru complained. Not taking notes doesn't constitute not paying attention. Ishan retorted. Cons what? Ishan sighed quietly. You really do remind me of her. Though I don't know why I'm acting like Nejire's dead or estranged. Remind you of who? Toru caught the mumble instantly. A friend. A friend. Toru brightened. Oh. Shunkan-kun, we should definitely be friends. Just because I can see you? He asked, eyebrow raised. Well, that's, like, a super duper tiny part of it, but what, you don't want to? I don't mind. Get a friend quest, complete. I truly am a master of social interaction, Ishan thought. I'm not antisocial because I can't make friends. It's because it's too easy. Maybe he'd get even more friends than Nejire and brag into her face instead. Yay! Toru cheered. See you tomorrow, Shunkan-kun. I'm gonna go make some more friends. Ishan watched as she happily wandered off toward a group of girls, then shrugged. Hey! A friend's a friend. I'm back. Welcome home, Shun-kun. Genzae was already on the couch, home early and watching TV. As Ishan headed toward the bathroom, folded clothes and a towel teleported into his arms, and his backpack vanished into his room. I'm taking a bath. He announced, but paused, then reappeared in front of his dad just as Genzae opened his mouth. Genzae stared at him, exasperated. I know you can see me speak ahead of time, he said, but at least let me start and finish my sentence. Sorry. Genzae just shook his head exasperatedly. This weekend, I've got a business trip to central Tokyo. Got myself some tickets to a popular hero's farewell event at the Tokyo Sky Egg. I think his name was Captain Celebrity. There'll probably be a ton of pro heroes there. Want to come? Ishan thought it over. Well, seems like something Nejire would like. How many tickets? 3. Sure.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200 plus audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.